So we'll kick off with our first panel, and our first panel is our talent and culture panel. It's let me see. I have the very long title here that I'll save you having to say, Alex. Right? So it's attracting, nurturing, and retaining animation talent, and why building a positive, diverse, and inclusive workplace culture is critical to the future of the industry. So that's the theme of our next panel. Our host is Alex Kotsos. Alex is originally from the UK, from Crawley. Is that what you said, Alex? Creepy Crawley is actually what you said to me. But Alex now lives behind me here, across the bay in Clare, so you're practically a local, Alex, which is great. Alex is our HR guru and has been very, very helpful to our industry. She's very much a professional people person. I think that's fair to say, Alex. And Alex is responsible and authored our competency framework that we launched last year at our AGM that I know has been a very, very useful tool for anybody working in the animation. So Alex, over to you for our talent and culture panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Alex. Thank you.
Ronan's already kindly gone through the title of the session, so I won't reiterate that. But what I would like to do is just introduce you to these wonderful people on the stage. And I think there's a saying, isn't there, that you're the average of the people that you surround yourself with. So right now, I'm kind of above average because I've got 4 amazing people. So I have next to me Eleanor and Kath and Mamobo and Tiffany, and I'm just going to hand over to each of them just to introduce themselves. So over to you, Eleanor.
Yeah, good morning. This is great. There's so many people here. Wasn't expecting as many people, but anyway, thank you. I'm with University College Cork, and we created a suite of programmes for industry, short programmes that are online, so that they're created specifically for industry in the areas of neurodiversity and wellbeing. And we're funded by Screen Ireland as Safe to Create, and it's a fantastic opportunity. Because I worked in the screen industry and in arts and creative industries for over 40 years. And since we started our pilot 2 years ago, we've had a massive response from industry, but in particular from animation, VFX, and from the gaming industry. And so much so that we're now working internationally with the European Broadcasting Union and with Screen Ireland to create safe workspaces for people in the industry. So thank you.
Lovely, thanks. Catherine.
Good morning. I am Catherine Roycroft and I'm from Cartoon Saloon, and that's an animation company down in Kilkenny. We make feature films, short films and TV series, and mostly based on our own IP, but not always. We're a studio that currently has approximately 95 people working with us, and worth noting that at our height we were at 260, and that was during the kind of green light frenzy during COVID-19. So coming back down to 95 was really hard because one of the perks of working in animation is the possibility of continuity of employment. So that's been hard, and even harder because before 2022 we had been able to offer continuity of employment from 2015 onwards. So that was a real coup, I think, for us, and we were very fortunate. We are crewing up right now, and we are starting production on a feature film this month, actually. And we can see ahead, thankfully, because of the long and slow process of animation, that we're going to start another production of our feature film next May. So there's medium-term confidence, I suppose, on work in the future, and confidence to attract crew and go back to the promise of continuity of employment, which is so important. My role is Chief Operations Officer, and that means different things in different companies. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about what I do, and it'll make sense why I'm sitting here. But so as head of operations, I have an operations A-team, and we do everything to make sure that we attract the right people, and that the people know that we're the right company for them. We do everything we can to keep them happy, make them happy in their job, make sure they have everything that they need to do their job, and keeping them happy in Kilkenny and keeping them happy in the studio. So in the operations team, we have HR and talent development, IT, studio facilities and crew events, communications, which is internal and external. I hope I haven't forgotten anybody, but all of that team works towards keeping everybody happy, and that's a lofty goal, and we'll talk more about that as part of the panel. So I'm looking forward to hearing other people's takes on that, and that's from me.
Hi everyone, my name is Mamobo, and I work for an organisation named GERM. I'm the founder and the CEO of the organisation, and the reason why GERM exists is that for us and for me, I don't consider myself someone like a film person at all. My background is actually in social psychology. And my research, I'm just finishing up my PhD program in understanding belongingness in Ireland. And a part of my work and my research looked at how film and media contributes to belongingness in Ireland when it comes to underrepresented and diverse communities. And I look at namely migrant communities in Ireland. So in the height of COVID-19, when I was kind of procrastinating on that work and finding all the findings of that research, and some of which is that there's a huge lack of belongingness when it comes to not only the sector, but wider society as well. So in that moment, I decided to just create a project that had people from the different communities that I was engaging with through this research to kind of have discussions around the area of belonging, inclusion in the media and wider film sector as well. And from that, it kind of spurred into a bigger project. More people wanted to get involved. And now we're a social enterprise working with community and industry in terms of bridging the two across lines of differences and creating that space for belonging in the sector. So what we do as an organization is we work on 3 pillars. We like to call them the 3 E pillars. What we do is we elevate the voices of underrepresented communities. We enable the communities to access programs that allow them to enter into, namely the screen sector. And we also equip leaders. That's kind of where I come back in terms of social psychology and giving them skills and intercultural skills to support communities to enter into the industry and also have that cultural sensitivity that's needed in engaging and creating an inclusive environment. So particularly speaking, we have a program called the Wide Chat program that's supported by Screen Ireland and the Arts Council. And that program supports people from migrant and ethnically diverse communities, age 18 to 25, in terms of building their knowledge around the film industry, building their knowledge around the screen sector, and providing opportunities such as mentorship, such as resources, such as just even a community for them to enter into the industry. Because what I've even noticed from the research is that there's a lack of community in terms of understanding. I feel like the film industry is a lot of a who you know culture, and particularly when you come from an underrepresented community, that access is even more bigger. So what we want to do is try to bridge that gap and allow for community and industry to unify across their differences. So that's me in a nutshell.
Hello, my name's Tiffany Feeney. I'm the founder of my recruitment company, Talent Outpost, which is based in Zurich, Switzerland, which I jokingly say is the hub of non-industry animation. So you're probably in the back of your head going, why Switzerland? Super easy. You just meet a Swiss person, get married, move to Switzerland, and start a company. But as you can probably tell from my dialect, I'm American, so I lived and worked in the US. I cut my teeth in commercial animation in New York City for about a decade. I then worked with DreamWorks Animation, leading their industry and outreach program, and then worked in mobile games before having the opportunity to go to Switzerland and figure out life here in Europe. But with our company, I primarily work with studios in Europe and North America, but we work with talent globally. As you know, I call us a nomadic tribe. So there's kind of a tour of duty that happens amongst the studios. And so we work with studios at a variety of different sizes. Going back to your comment about, our industry is a who you know, I jokingly say that once you're about 30 people in your studio, you kind of run out of friends to hire. Yeah. And then the recruitment function becomes a little bit more relevant and you're like, oh, we need a system. So we help out smaller studios, we work with bigger studios. Oftentimes it's whether or not laying in senior leadership or executives, or when you're crewing up really fast and you just kind of need extra recruitment oomph, but not necessarily to bring on the head count for it. So I look forward to talking more about these issues today. Thanks.
Lovely, thank you. And I will say, as you can see, I am among greatness, and I'm sure you're going to have loads of questions, so we're going to save some time at the end to do questions at the end, if that's okay. So I'm going to kick off with a big question, with the C word that nobody ever really wants to say on stage, COVID. Before your minds go elsewhere. So what I want to ask is, during COVID, we had this kind of enforced remote working. What impact has that had on the industry in general? Do people even still want to work in the studio? And I'm going to go to Kath first with that question, as somebody who had to grow up and then change numbers again. So do people still want to be in a studio, do you think?
I think instinctively, if you were to ask somebody who has been working from home the whole time along, they'll say no. I'm really nicely set up. I've got my routines and I've got my location in my house carved out. And we spend a lot of time trying to I don't want to say convince people, but definitely talk about the perks of being back in the studio. And we nod consistently back to the vision that the directors have in the company. And we have had to thread coming into the studio through every strategy that we talk about, because it's so important to us to have everybody back in the studio. So we blamed Paul, Tom and Nora for that decision, so it doesn't have to look like it was a HR decision or a security decision. And because we threaded through the whole strategy, we're all the time trying to make life easier for you to come back to the studio. And we really want to create a place that feels like if you are not there, you're missing something. And that's not easy, because COVID did bring many positives in that we learned that we can all work remotely. But just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And personally, I found it horrendous trying to manage people. I know the managers found it really hard. There was lots of upskilling around managing remote teams. And we got through it, and it was hugely successful, but in terms of output and deliveries. But it was hard, and I think we made things very hard. And I would find that we're still coming out of COVID. So getting people to think about coming into a room to meet with people as opposed to dialing in online. And like we have a team in the studio that's about 9 people who sit across one floor in Cartoon Saloon. They meet every Thursday morning on their computers instead of just going upstairs to a room. So there's still like, lads, will you turn off the headphones, mics, and go up and use the room, and it'll be really nice. And everyone else in the room won't have to be quiet because you're having a meeting. So they're still thinking, people are still in the habit, because we were 2 years at home. So it only takes 60 days to make a habit. So we really went above and beyond that. So I do think that people are happy at home if that's where they've been, and we're trying to get them thinking a little differently. We do offer hybrid, and that's been very good. But what was most surprising for us is that the amount of people in an interview, or even when we were coming out of COVID and back to the studio, that were like, oh no, right, that's it, I can't wait until I can apply for COVID, and where's the application form? But actually, we've only got about a third of the people in the studio, and that's been fairly consistent from when we were at 180 come back to the studio to the 90 now that want to work hybrid. So thankfully, we have kind of a proof that once people are back in the studio, they are happy to be there. So the obstacle is not keeping them in the studio, the obstacle is getting them to come through the door in the first instance. And belonging, to come back to your point, is definitely one of the major selling. Sorry, Mo, I did it. I moved away from my mic. So belonging is massive. So we're all the time trying to think about how can we get people together. And we've found actually that using our own expertise has been invaluable. So, saying, okay, Paul, Tom and Nora, if you want people to come back, that you need to be present and you need to be talking and sharing. So we find that sharing information and reminding people of why we all work for Cartoon Saloon, or why we all work on the project we're working on, is really important. But it's a slow burner. Like I said, we're still coming out of COVID. Because you didn't have to think about bringing people together for 2 years, we're still kind of like, oh, we forgot to do that this month, or we need to bring people together. So there's a hangover in it that we're all still coming out of. But definitely belonging, definitely bringing people together, and just making sure every conversation is all about what do the crew want, how do we make them happy. And then one more thing, and I'm sorry, I know I've totally held everything up, but ask the crew, because we forget. We forget that it's not just our opinions that count in the operations team, because we're like, oh, I've had a brilliant idea. But like, the operations team are all fairly similar aged, between 40 and over 40. But that's one generation. We have 4 generations in Cartoon Saloon. And I've no doubt that there's 4 generations in most studios, especially the bigger ones. So remember that you've got to think of an event that suits 4 generations. And that's not easy. So knowing who your crew are, going back out to the crew, asking the hard questions, being open to the hard answers, has all been very important. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, so what have you found that people really do want from the workplace? So when you have asked them, what is it that brings you here? What do you want? What?
They want to bring their dogs. Forgot the dogs, yeah. Yeah, I think, values is massive. People feel like their values are being matched in the workplace. So, equality, diversity and inclusion, not just a buzzword, people really want to see it and feel it. And I think the Black Lives Matter event got people thinking a little differently about aligned values. So I think not just talking values, but like really getting in there and rolling it out every opportunity you get. I think people like that supports and flexibility. Flexibility has been massive for us, and that's another word that even if a question is asked, we almost try and make sure that we're using the word flexible in the answer. So like, okay, because we're trying to find a flexible way to work with this, this is how we're going to do it. And if people feel like we're trying to find a solution to whatever they've brought to us, whether it's an accommodation or a problem, so I think people value flexibility, they value values, they value dogs. And not necessarily in that order.
I'll say flexibility first. I think that when I talk to candidates and what is a culture of a studio, I kind of describe our time, pre-COVID, the pendulum was swinging one way, 100% in the studio. During COVID, the pendulum swung 100% the other way. And I'd always said, it's going to settle somewhere in the middle. And I see studios being very successful with a hybrid workplace. So, like 2-3 days in the studio, 2-3 days working from home. But where it's been even more successful is leaving it up to the teams to go and decide together as to which days they are in the studio. Because no one wants to show up to a studio to check the box that I've been here 2 days a week and none of your colleagues are there. Then they're like, why did I come here? I'm sitting on a video call with my other colleagues at home. I went through all this effort, but I'm not getting that community feeling. And with the flexibility piece, I think around that is, what's your studio hours and kind of being fixed within that time versus having flexibility at the beginning or the end. And so many, especially, middle-aged people who have children, they're like, I don't want to give up picking up my kid from school. Like, they really find that as a value moment for their family life. So how can we go and accommodate that flexibility that they're like, I want to do 2 pickups a week. Does that work with the studio? This is really important to me. So I think it's one part about the studio culture, but it's also where we go and we allow people's lives to kind of come into it, where the work will get done, but do we need it to be done between 9 to 6, 9 to 7, whatever your studio hours are, and then also just being really mindful of crunch, right? Like, I think right now what we're seeing, not only within the industry of the reduced work, but also with the work hours that we're doing, we're in like a really strange combination of burnout that's happening, and in addition to the COVID hangover. And so I think it's just kind of these things that just been layered on and how people are identifying what's important and also different strategies to cope around that.
We started our program at the beginning of COVID, but it was the industry that came to us that asked us to start it because there was such a demand for it. But I researched in this area, and there was such an upsurge in policy that came out during COVID about workplaces, about neurodiversity, about inclusion. And it was really funny to see there was nothing really before. It was like very tokenistic. And all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, there's neurodivergent people working in the industry. We're going to have to do something about that. And it was just really interesting. But I also spoke to a lot of people who came on the course, which is mostly management and things. But what they were saying was onboarding people during COVID and then bringing them back into the workplace, a workplace they'd never been to before, because they were onboarded during it. And they found that a nightmare to onboard people who hadn't been in a workplace, who hadn't met their work colleagues, who only talked to them on Teams. And if you already have a communication barrier, to suddenly be face-to-face with people it's sort of like a different relationship. So it is going to take time for people to come back into that space because they already have a communication difficulty and they were used to using Teams. And so there will be a period of kind of acclimatization. I even had 1 or 2 people who had done the course in the beginning ringing me in a panic and anxiety of having to come back into studio. And real serious anxiety that I couldn't help them with because I'm not a medical professional. So they needed that level of help to get it in. But they were very lucky because you're very lucky you have an industry that does have that flexibility, that does have that understanding, and that values talent. Not all of the media industry does that. So it was really interesting to hear that because we have no data about this because COVID was so new, but definitely from the onboarding point of view, your new talent that came in during COVID, especially if they do have issues which you're probably not aware of, to be honest, are going to find it difficult coming back into the studio. But I think if we think creatively, because we're creative people, I think it will make it easier for people to come back into work because they're already talented people. You already have recognised their talent, so it's nothing outside of your comfort zone to actually be creative about bringing people back in.
And just to kind of further on that point, and I'm going to start with you, Tiffany. So as well as the flexibility, how do we make sure that we like in Ireland, that our studios are attractive for our talent here? Aside from giving them flexibility, what else do we need to do to keep people in this country and also maybe even attract international talent?
Yeah. Well, just to kind of piggyback off of Eleanor's point and then to answer that question, I think the other piece is that we were saying about the different generations. So we have a generation of talent that graduated college and their first job was remote. Like that is their normal of the industry. And their normal of the industry is that they entered the industry when we went through this huge boom. So for this bust moment, they're just like, what is happening? And we're all like, this is normal. Like, were you around in 2008? You would have seen this then. You know, like those of us that have been in it a while, we kind of know this cycle. But for them, it feels like whiplash. And so being aware of the junior talent, just trying to make sense of what this industry is and having a sense of stability. And I think that that's often, even with our pros, having a conversation around stability. And I think that that leads into your question. It's like, for you to go and attract the talent to Ireland, and for them to kind of feel like, if I go through this effort to come into Ireland so that you can get your tax rebate, you know, the undercurrent of what it is, for them to come here is like, well, how can I build a life here? What is my stability here? How do I go and have opportunities within the country so that I'm not having to, again, be that nomadic warrior? And that was something that definitely before COVID, I said, like, you know, our talent has relocation fatigue. You know, like they want to go and have some roots. They want to go and build some stability. And it may be fun when you're younger to kind of taste a lot, but then you get to a point in your life where you do want stability for if you're starting a family. And then there's other sides of our talent that have been in these, you know, monolithic studios like the Disneys, the Pixars, XYZ for 20 plus years. Their children are finally leaving for college and they're like, I can finally visit the world. And so we have some really opposing needs or interests within that, but it all comes down to when you bring talent in, how do you kind of create an ecosystem within Ireland so that you're working and collaborating together as studios and for your projects so that you can go and help each other out when talent rolls off of one project, how do you set them up with your next studio? And I like to think of this as a little bit like your university alumni department, right? So when you went to college, your college wants all of your alumni to do awesome, to do, you know, great work so that you can be the poster child for that college saying, look, they did great. If you come here and get an education, you may do great too. And then the college wants to ask you for money. That's a part of their game too. But if you, as a studio, creating your own alumni network of anybody that's ever worked there and they've moved on to the next project, how are you as a studio keeping relationships with the talent so that when that crew changes over, how do you still have a relationship with them that you are at the organizational level and that there's an inherent history versus just the only crew? And I think that that's something that often gets lost in our industry because they're like, oh, I used to work there, but no one I worked with is at that studio anymore. So that's like non-existing for us. But there's a little bit of organization and systemic and building a community around that then you can go and build the larger network for it to thread together. That would be, it's a lofty dream, but it can be done. And I think that that's one way that you build that sense of stability to not have a brain drain from your industry here within Ireland.
Yeah, if you don't mind. What was I going to say? So that's really important, and we're getting our heads around what
you and
like.
Lighthouse have like a collaboration.
We do. We have a little cluster in Kilkenny, which is fantastic, and Distillery Films is also down there. So there is a sense that Kilkenny is now becoming a place to go that could offer continuity of employment. And clusters are really important. There's one being that's growing in the west of Ireland too. It's Studio Mala and what's going on in Galway. But what's really important is actually if the animation studios can talk to each other, and that's starting its life too, where we share what's coming up and timelines of, we have a massive animation department that's finishing, where are you in your pipeline of recruitment? Possibly there is some sharing. So when we speak as an animation HR forum, I suppose is what we've called ourselves, but we talk about it's so hard to get crew to come to Ireland. It's definitely hard to get people to come to the regions. Let's not lose them. If we lose them in the region, let's not lose them outside of Ireland. So the whole nation working the whole country working together, all the animation studios, and definitely being supported by Animation Ireland is fantastic. So we have the grassroots alumnus with the crew, but working together as a studio hub in Ireland then is also very helpful. I just wanted to answer to an earlier question, which was around, things that you have to think about when crew are moving into Kilkenny or into Ireland is housing, just to mention one of the things that is such a hard thing to address.
International talent are shocked by the prices.
Yeah.
Absolutely shocked. So they're just like, oh, half my wage is going to go to rent.
Yeah, and I mean that's assuming there's availability. So the availability is the first problem, and then the price is the second problem. So we have a solution that's not, it's only going to be helpful for a small amount of people, but we would take on the leases of houses and rent them back to the crew, because it takes the terror, I suppose, of like, I don't know what High Street looks like in County Kilkenny, and is that a safe place to live or not? So we take the pain out of it. We give people 3 to 6 months contracts so they can kind of land and see what Kilkenny's like, where you'd like to live, because most people that come to work in Kilkenny don't drive, so we try and keep them inside the ring road. That's very local speak, but it means you can possibly cycle. And so yes, we kind of try, and that's the brilliant thing about putting many brains into the room. Like, okay, what was the hardest thing about moving to Kilkenny? So we try and address all of that when we're recruiting, so that we're kind of getting ahead. We're not pretending there's no housing crisis. We're not pretending. We're putting it out there on the table, recognising what's going to be a concern and trying to deal with it there and then.
Yeah, it's a massive issue. We won't talk about housing too much. Be here all day. So in terms of, let's say we get the people into the studios, what do we need to do to help retain them? So how do we stop them going abroad where the housing is cheaper? And how do you give them, and even in this room, like I know a few people here, and you can see, and like you were saying, they might leave one studio and go to another. But how do we make sure that when they're in the studio, they get growth and learning and opportunity against probably quite tight deadlines on shows, quite tight budgets? How do you ensure that people are still getting those opportunities to grow so that they can leave and be continuously employed somewhere else? Sorry, Kath, I'm going to raise this one to you again.
You'll be really sick at the sound of my voice. I suppose, to say something really obvious, just be really transparent about the jobs that are open and equal opportunities. So everyone understands what's going on in the studio and the opportunities that are available to you. And, everyone comes in on day one and they want to be a director, and we understand that. We assume that for everyone that comes through the door. But we try and encourage people to think about the next step, not the end goal. So, again, just constant communication. So we would have just reviews where we get to talk to people about what it is you're looking for. And we try and, thread that through them with a lot of reality. And but productions are hard, and the budgets are getting tighter, and the schedules are getting shorter, and so there's. It's important that the job that you're there to do is being done, as well as looking ahead to the next one. Transparency is massive. Communication is massive. I think people get afraid, certainly in Cartoon Saloon, when they feel like they don't really know what's going on. Like, what's coming next? Is it my job? Is this where it ends, or is there another job coming? So again, those kind of belonging events and coming together is really about sharing information as much as we can confirm, and if we can't confirm it, then at least we're letting them know these are the possibilities, so people feel like they have a say in what's going to happen for them next, and I think that's really important. I've totally lost my train of thought. Oh, sorry. Sing a song.
Well, while you're thinking, I'm just going to ask Tiffany, give you a moment to think. So when candidates are talking to you about what they're looking for, so they want flexibility, how important is it for them to have an opportunity that's challenging when they're, how often are they moving for the next step up rather than just a sideways step?
Well, I think that for talent, especially creative talent, like they want to understand like what the challenges are of the show, right? So are they expanding their skill set? Is it going to be a project that they'll feel proud of and that, can help them get their next job, right? So it's kind of like, what is this next piece that can go and elevate them to whatever is their end goal? And then I think then the other part is just kind of leadership, right? So I'm always talking with talent to go and identify, like, are you a super awesome individual contributor, you have no interest in leading people, or do you want to get into a place where you do want to lead people and have a say? And what kind of a builder are they? Are they a people builder? Are they a pipeline builder? Are they a tool builder? Like, what goes and gets them really excited to contribute onto a show? And whether or not the studio has an ecosystem to enable some of those traits. Because again, if you're a vendor studio and you're kind of putting a pipeline together that's a little bit unique on the show, where you have a lot of flexibility in the type of work that you're doing, then maybe building a long-term, deep, efficient pipeline isn't where you're going to go and invest, because you know that you're going to be changing the pieces around quite often. So some of those pieces can really influence what interests the talent, but it really comes down to the people that they're meeting with, and if they feel like they can trust who they're speaking with, and that the walk and the talk are aligning. And so then that makes them feel really comfortable coming into a studio to contribute to that project. And going to Catherine's point about the transparency, I think that if you're a vendor studio and you have a slate, communicating that, what's on deck for your team, and like what might be starting or not starting, or where the gap will be, or we are anticipating a gap, but we're actively putting bids here and we won't know until this, that. It's just kind of a degree of like how much effort from the studio for business development is being made to do that best work to try to keep the work consistently flowing in. And I think that that's what is really challenging about our industry. We're really project-based. We're not the postman. We're not delivering mail every day, right? So we do have gaps, and when things are built and delivered, how do we kind of keep the pipeline filled, and just to build that transparency and trust and that forthrightness to keep the open communication with the talent so that they understand. Without a doubt, there's always going to be people who get really pissed off about it, right? Like, I think there's this inevitable that there's just individuals that kind of are on that side, but most people just want to be kept in the loop. They want to know what their options are if they need to start really looking for things for themselves.
I remembered. Thank you for your patience, but I'm going to actually come back to your point, because I totally agree. There's two types of people in the studio, but there's also a third type starting to reveal itself, which is those that like to train and pass on what they've learned. And just to mention another thing that might raise a grumble in the room, Section 481 and the training requirements, the skills development requirement, means that there's an obligation on studios to have a focused and strategic approach to skills development and bringing in new people, focusing on diversity and inclusion. And the paperwork is very hard, but the outcomes have been amazing. And we've found that loads of people are really interested in engagement and are really interested in training because they've been the recipient of training and really want to pass that on. Or just see the value of bringing in students and watching them grow under their wing. So it's been horrendous. Like the Section 481 mechanics have been really hard, but you can't but see the benefits to the people who are in the studios existing and the corridors that are being created through Section 481 skills development requirements. So that's another way that the studios can find innovative ways to make sure that cross-training opportunities are there and used, because the Department of Culture love to see it, the crew love to have the opportunities, so everybody's winning.
Thank you. So I want to sort of take the conversation a little bit more into the future, so bring in Mamobo and Eleanor more into the discussion in terms of, we have a studio, we have, like you said, there's 4 generations now. How do we encourage more young people into animation as a career? What do we need to do to go out to them and say, look, this exists in Ireland, we now have these amazing award-winning studios, there's a level of continuity of employment. What do we need to do? So Mamobo, I'll ask you first.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'm learning a lot here in terms of animation and the whole world itself. So thank you so much. In terms of the work that we do in our organization, we work with young people aged 18 to 25 that come from namely underrepresented communities, namely migrant and low-income communities, in terms of access into the film industry. The reason behind that was that as I started my co-founder, who's a documentary filmmaker, and we both come from low-income migrant family households. And as one thing that we really noticed was that there's a lack of education and there's a lack of community for these individuals to get access into it. Like I said earlier, the film industry and media industry at large is a very who-you-know culture in Ireland. And my co-founder, her name's Ala Bousir, she had that difficulty in accessing the industry as well. She's a Muslim woman herself. And we wanted to create avenues for people that were like us and communities wider to get that access into the industry, and not just access as well, but actually supporting industry as well, to say that this is a bunch of talent that's out there for you as well. So what we've noticed is that these individuals, it's not for a lack of talent, it's not for a lack of creativity, it's a lack of knowledge, resources, mentorship, and training. So we were like, okay, let's actually create something to actually build an avenue. I don't see us as the studio, I don't see us as the production company, we're just the gateway for getting people into the industry. And one thing that we've noticed is that rather than them finding it for themselves, or even the company saying, hey, this is here, a lot of people, they don't feel safe enough to approach the companies, don't feel safe enough to approach the studios. And particularly when you're coming from a even more underrepresented or marginalized background, that safety or that idea, because I'm assuming a lot of companies, they are open, they are saying we're willing to bring you in. But when you come from that community yourself, it's more of an idea thing. It's more of a thing that you have in your head being like, I'm not going to be safe here. So we kind of want to be that soft landing. I kind of call our programs a kindergarten program before they actually enter the real world. But we want to be that soft landing for people to feel that sense of belonging. And in our programs as well, one is actually starting today. So it's in a studio in Dublin. But in our programs, rather than having the young people go into the studios, we bring the industry professionals to our soft landing, to our programs, and they speak about what it's like, and then they start to build those connections within themselves as well. And looking forward, what we want to do is, and one of the learnings that we've had is that rather than bringing the communities into our space, we want to start to go into their spaces. So we're looking to working with even more different communities, asylum seekers, people in refugee-like situations, and going into the centers and having them be aware of the opportunities that are out there, because there's massive opportunities in the media sector, but there's that lack of knowledge for these communities as well. So looking forward, what we're planning to do is go into these centers, go into schools, go into transition year programs to kind of have young people understand that this sector is for them, and understanding that, like what you said, Catherine, that it's not all about directing. There's so much that people can actually do in this area if you have good organization skills, if you have good makeup skills, for example. These can all be used within the film sector as well. So it's really providing that spark as well. And we piloted the White Shop program last year, and we did like an impact report. And one of the things we were kind of saying, okay, what is the skills development, how people have transitioned in terms of their knowledge of the sector and how they're going afterwards. But one of the main factors that we didn't even realize that we were doing, because again, it's a kindergarten program, it's the very basics of the industry. What the young people said was the feeling of belonging that they had, that they could be themselves, they could be their authentic selves, and coming from very different, like roughly half the people that we engaged with were in a refugee-like situation. So it was that sense of belonging that they had, and that comfort that they could even go out into the world. Some of them are now trainees on sets and productions as well. They can go out into that world, but they could also come back to us when there was fear, when there was anxiety, when there was something that they had personally that they couldn't feel really comfortable talking to the studio or the production company with. So it's that sense of belonging and that safety. I feel a lot of young people, especially you were talking as we're going from like a remote environment into being in person again, that fear and safety and belonging, that's what's necessary for these younger generations to start to enter, especially when they're from a marginalized community, start to enter into the industry.
And do you think the industry is doing enough to go into those communities and to speak to people?
I would say there is a lot of zeal and enthusiasm, but I would also say that there is a fear as well in going to their space. So there's this expectation, like build it and they'll come kind of thing, but people aren't coming. So what I challenge companies and studios to do is to try to find avenues to go into the community space. And one, you'll feel how it feels like to be like, oh my goodness, I'm in a place that I don't feel comfortable in. And that's how those communities feel when they're in your space. But I would say there's a zeal, there's an enthusiasm, there's a willingness to learn a lot of times. But I feel that what needs to happen is that there needs to be people to go into the community space, to go in to see what the communities are feeling, where they're understanding, and trying to get a bit of cultural sensitivity. Because sometimes we feel like, okay, they're doing a job, they're doing an activity, but when you're coming from a different cultural background, particularly, the way you may do it may be completely different, but oftentimes it's seen as wrong because it's just different. So I would challenge people to go into different cultural spaces to kind of get an understanding as to how those communities feel, and then you bring that back to your environment.
And you were saying you mainly work with 18 to 25-year-olds. Is there scope then to make that even younger? Because in my head, I'm thinking animation, you've got... And
Yes.
there's a lot of people here who grew up drawing and they knew that this was going to be part of their lives. How do we tap into that?
Yes, so one of the challenges that we even had was trying to make it even younger as well. So with our program, what we try to do is, because we want to make it very locally based, we work across like 4 locations now in Ireland, and we have community partners on the ground that have that connection, access to the community as well. But one community that we've been not struggling with, but with engagement, but trying to get that further engagement, was the traveller community. So there's a huge traveller community here in Galway as well, and we were trying to engage with the traveller community in Galway, and our community partner, after a lot of engagement, doing calls, meeting people, etc., our community partner was like, what happens with the traveller communities by the time they're 18? A lot of young people, by the time they're 18, 25, they're married. They don't have interest in things that are creative. This is sort of like a nice to have sort of thing. So that was a learning for us to gain more cultural sensitivity for the traveller community particularly, and have ourselves think like, okay, do we have to open our program to people who are under 18, not only for the traveller community, but for people that are younger, that have that, that don't have to think about being an adult yet, or don't have to think about university yet. So for the future for this program, what we're trying to do is to, for us to organise ourselves to see how we can be better equipped to working with under 18s, and also engage with stakeholders that already have those under 18s within them. So, for example, deaf schools, for example, secondary schools, transition year programs, and community organisations as well. So that's what we're trying to do, to engage with people, those who are under 18, because that talent is already there. It's just to make a bud and spark.
And so, talking of kind of making a bud and a spark, the other thing that we know about the creative industries is that we've got a significant proportion of neurodivergent professionals working in here. So, Eleanor, are we doing enough to help those people thrive in our studios?
I think animation is the most progressive out of all of the groups that I've worked with. Our programs are for industry. Neurodivergent people have gone through the educational system. They already know they're neurodivergent, or maybe they don't know they're neurodivergent. They know what way they work. So, you don't talk to the converted. But what we do is we work with industry, because industry needs to be educated about this area. 20 to 30% of the industry are neurodivergent, and that's a conservative estimate. And these figures came from the UK. In the UK, that's nearly there's 250,000 people working in the industry across the UK and Northern Ireland. In the Irish industry, we have no figures. In the Irish industry, it was an area for a long time that was just not addressed. And I've worked in the industry, but I'm also autistic. And there's barriers, false barriers that are created. Things like for recruitment, why is it a big deal to tell somebody there's going to be 3 people in the room? Or there's going to be, and these are the names of these people. So I don't feel that anxiety before I walk into the room. I've earned my place in the room with my CV. I've earned my place. I've gone through the educational system. I've fought every step of the way to get through the educational system. I've earned my place in that room. But if you're going to start putting barriers, false barriers, it shouldn't be rocket science. It shouldn't be scary, because the person, you've looked at their CV and you said, I want this person in the room. And then the next problem is onboarding, which, again, we're creating false barriers around it. The biggest, I think, barrier within the industry at the moment is education and training for people who are hiring, for people who are retaining staff. And I've worked at Teach Cahir, RTE, and I say big, like the EBU and that kind of places like that. And it's just surprising how people just are so systematic and so stuck in the way they've done things that when you ask them to do something, just take a little step to the left, and this will create a culture of inclusion, which I think is what Mamobo and I want to create, because it serves our purposes. Because I worked in the industry for a long time, and I didn't know I was autistic. And I didn't know why I was having problem communicating. I didn't know why I couldn't read the emails. I didn't know why that the scheduling looked like double Dutch to me and everybody else knew what it was, or there was like some sort of code or manual that everybody else had that I just didn't have. And we need to just step to the left. That's all it is. There is no, it's not rocket science. It's just thinking a little bit outside the box. How do we communicate? How can we change our system slightly to accommodate everybody? And I think it isn't, somebody said to me when I was talking to RTE, like in an RTE, when I went in to give a talk to RTE, it was the funniest thing because like 100 and something people signed up for it and 20 people came in the room and all of them were for children's programming. And all of them were either animation or children's programming. And I was like going, oh my God, because they saw the value of it, because they're seeing it every day in their workplace. But there was an awful lot of denial everywhere else. And I've worked at the Cartoon Saloon and Lighthouse Studios, and there is skepticism about this. But 20 to 30% of your industry, people you're working with every single day are neurodivergent, and you don't know. And what you're doing is, when they leave, you're going, oh, why did they leave? Oh my God, why did they leave? Did I say something wrong? And it could be simply that they can't read your emails. Or, you know, or the access to pathways of advancement within your organization are not clear. And it is coming back to your point about transparency, about how we communicate with people. And, you know, because neurodiversity is diversity of the human brain. Okay, so everybody in here, when you say that term neurodiverse, you're talking about everybody. It's not somebody over there. Neurodiverse is everybody. Everybody has an individual brain. Neurodivergent is when you have different slight medical complications that you might need help with. And that's all it is. It's not something scary. I remember when we ran the pilot of it, and I've had an animator in there. I'm not going to say who, because as soon as I say them, you all know the person. But they were in there at it, and the first couple of weeks, they were so skeptical. They said, this is 12 weeks. This is a complete waste of my time. But they were there because they knew people were coming into them. They had fantastic people who might have had serious functionality issues, and they just wanted to know how to help them, and there was a willingness there. By the time they were finished, they're now speaking out. They're now going out, and they're now brought more people to us, and we're getting more and more from the animation. We have now a higher percentage of animators coming in on our courses than we have with other parts of organizations. So as I said, it's a step to the left, but it's also about to stop thinking so systematically. I know it's systems that work, but it doesn't work for everybody, and they're afraid to tell you. They're afraid to tell you because they're going to lose their job. And if they're talented enough to be in the room, you don't want to lose them. You need to be able to make them feel safe and they don't have to tell you what's wrong, you know, or they don't have to tell you but if they tell you, ask them, rather than saying, what's your medical condition? That's first of all illegal, by the way. But if you say, is there anything we can make sure that works better? And you'll find that not everybody it won't be the neurodivergent people who will speak out. Everybody in the room will feel safer, rather than saying, oh my God, okay, we'll have donuts with breakfast. You know, but you know, it's just about, it makes a safer place for everybody. It makes it, you know, a culture of inclusion. And it's, as I said, it's just a step to the left.
And it's often a larger benefit to the broader population, too. And I think that's one of those things that go and ask for. So I'll say with the younger generation, I'm often asked this question if I do a workshop or a panel. They're like, when I'm interviewing, how do I communicate that I'm neurodivergent and that I might need an accommodation? You know, they're aware that they have a need, but they don't know how to communicate it without creating a stigma or a bias in it. And I always appreciate that they ask the question. And there are some organizations that have really great guidelines, like it's been built into their policy to go and support the hiring efforts and to be conscientious of the accommodations and having a framework to ask a candidate. But on the other side, if you don't have such a policy, going back to Eleanor's example about like, who's gonna be in the room for 3 people? Like, let someone know. Like, even normal people would like to know if they're walking into a panel interview. But you can go and lay out as a recruiter, if we're going to be speaking with someone, like, here's the process. These are how many people that we're going to have in each one. This is who you're going to interview. Is there anything that I should be aware of that you need to know about your interview, or anything that we might need to accommodate, right? I've opened up the door for you to communicate your needs to me. And that's what I often say to neurodivergent. I said, tell us how to help you. And then we can go and identify as like, is it a big ask? Is it a no-brainer ask? Oftentimes they're very, very simple solutions. We're just not conscientious to ask the question or to be able to go and service those individuals as they need.
I just want to say on that, like we've as a company feel like we've created a psychologically safe environment, yet we get very few disclosures and requests for accommodations. So the reality suggests that we're not as safe as we think we are. And that's not great, and it's quite painful to recognise it, but it's almost, and I hate to say chicken and egg, but we need the requests for accommodations to understand how we can be doing it better. And I understand that education will definitely be a massive foundation for that, but how do you create the safe space that helps people feel safe to ask for accommodation, that informs the safe space? So there's a lot of learning for studios, I'd imagine, to do.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, it's going to take time. You know, these things, like, as I said, when COVID happened, everybody was, all of a sudden, I was being invited everywhere, and everybody was really, really interested in what I had to say. And I was a carer for 20 years, so I came back into the industry late, and I have, like, all these barriers that are suddenly in my way. You know, I wasn't educated enough, or I wasn't, willing to accept toxic work practices in order to stay in the industry, and then to find out at 50 that I was autistic was like, oh my God. And I was lecturing on autism. I'm also the head of autism studies in UCC. So for 14 years I was teaching it and didn't even know I was talking about myself, which the media found hilariously funny. They were like, oh, well, let's do an interview about how you were 14 years teaching it, you didn't even know. But I think it's really important that, it will take time, and to accept that it will take time. And people were, I totally agree with you, it's really hard to disclose, but it's really hard for the person who has to disclose, because that's fear I'm going to lose my job and I'm going to lose my livelihood. But also, creating culture for inclusion is not going to happen overnight. Myself and Mamobo, like we were shouting in the wind for so long, and since COVID and since there's been such a high increase of diversity coming into Ireland, people suddenly realise, oh my God, all these people are coming in. Where are they going to work? We're a creative industry. We have a responsibility. I mean, your animations can reflect diversity, but if there's not diversity behind in the process, it's a waste of time. It's a false narrative. So we need to grab the bull by the horns and take responsibility. And, I had people coming on the course being so skeptical about it and saying, how can I do that? Policy, education, and even you don't have to come to us, in UCC, but it's a massive brand and it's a very, very good course. But it's an international, big sales pitch, but it's an internationally recognised qualification. But we have universities in Australia, we have all across Europe coming to us now, asking us questions, wanting all of our notes, which they're not going to get. But we have to take responsibility, and that's the biggest thing about it. You can talk the talk, but you have to walk the walk. You have to educate yourselves, because that takes away your fear. And as I said, it's not rocket science. It's better for the industry. It's better for international work, because if you're selling product abroad, in America they're quite progressive. It's now coming in. I mean, Disney does all of their stuff in-house. I've been trying to crack that egg for a long time. But looking at what's out there, we're going to be left behind. And if we want to be ahead of the game, we need to step up. And my course is the first course of its kind in the world. Ireland is at the head of the game. We just need the industry to buy into it, or else it's a waste of my time.
And I think that's the great thing about being in Ireland, right? It is a smaller place. We have a smaller industry. A lot of people know each other, but we can actually use that to our advantage. So instead of it being a who you know in a bad way, we can use it to do positive things and create the safe spaces. Mamobo, is there anything you want to add about how we create a safe space for our people?
I think one thing that Eleanor said that is super important when it comes to creating that space safe is that policy and putting that into practice. But who emulates that practice is very important when it comes for people to disclose, let's say, personal information. And so what I would like to say is that basically when we're trying to create that culture of inclusion, having the leaders in the organization, having the people who have influence with the organization practice all the things that we're trying to do in policy and practice in creating that safe space. And these are things that can be learned, by the way. Is super important to create that culture of inclusivity. So when it comes to even the training, the education, having those leaders even show up, having those leaders speak, having those leaders communicate, like we were saying earlier, the flexibility that's needed in the workplace when it comes to people having an understanding of their future, having an understanding of the jobs that are out there. So having the senior leadership within the organization really breathe that culture of inclusivity, and that culture of belonging is hugely necessary and important for creating that culture of inclusion. And once everybody sees it, we're like sheep, to be honest. So once everybody sees it, then they start to emulate that behavior itself, and it starts to breathe that culture of inclusivity and that culture of belonging. I always say that, and people think I'm like a bit airy-fairy when I say it, but belonging is one of the most fundamental things that we need as humans, psychologically speaking. And if that's not in your group-based environment, whether that's work, whether that's your personal space, you won't be able to thrive as an individual. And this is regardless of what background that you're coming from. So when we want to cultivate that space of belonging, it's often guided by the leadership, and it's often guided by who has influence within that space. So I want to challenge you, if you have that influence in that space, I want you to start thinking of, okay, what are the actions that I'm taking to build this inclusive culture, to build this environment where people that are in my team, but that are in my organization, that are in my studio, feel that they can thrive, feel like they can belong, and feel that we can move forward in our projects together.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to kind of round this bit up and just open it up to questions, because I've had frantic 10 minutes, your time's up. So, frantic is a bit hard. Well, I like to exaggerate. Let's give it a bit of drama here. So I want to thank you all. So what we know is we need more flexibility, transparency. We need to create this element of belonging to create the safe spaces.
And puppies.
And yes, many dogs. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. Obviously, you've got 4 wonderful people here you can ask questions of. So has anybody got a question for the panel? Yes.
When it comes to the training, when it comes to training and taking on board like the mentorship of some employees to the new employment, is there any active programs for that?
Do you mean within the studio or external to the studio?
Within the studio.
Within a studio? Definitely. So each studio kind of has their own ecosystem in which they're going to onboard talent. But what I say that if you don't have more formalized structure, at a minimum is setting up your new employee with a mentor, right? So someone in your department, and that is their safe person to ask any question, right? So not only learning the tools, but what is the culture of the studio, to be like, if they're struggling with something for 10 minutes, go ask your mentor, right? Like, don't be suffering for half a day. You're wasting more time, and it's harder for yourself to do that. And I think that that's one part that's really important. When I was at DreamWorks, and again, within the industry and outreach program for entry-level talent, and this is also a really great leadership development piece when you go and you assign a mentor to a mentee, is in that very first week, we would have a one-on-one meeting with the new hire. For my role, since I hired them in, I'd have my meeting with them, kind of make sure that they're settled in. Do you know a mentor? Do you know who your mentor is? That's step 1, make sure that's assigned. In addition to them doing their training, but then about 4 weeks in, we just have a one-on-one with the mentor. How is that process going? What are you observing that they might need education-wise? And then 3 months in, meeting with the mentee again, how are you feeling settled in, right? The first 90 days. Do they feel like they're at home? Are they having the skills that they need? Are they building a community? Do they know more people in the department? Do you have a lunch buddy, right? Like, it's really, sometimes it's basic things like that of just going and getting acclimated in, and then going in, oh, sorry, my phone just fell. And then going and having a final meeting with the mentors again, because we would set that up to be the first 6 months for someone to be acclimated into the studio. And by having those meetings with the new employee and with the mentor, we could go and tweak and customize what they needed to come in. And I also added as a way to go and build their community within the studio. So then, because we know who the people are, they don't know who they are yet, to point them in the right direction. You should have a conversation with so-and-so. Do you know this person? They actually graduated from your school too. Go have coffee with them. And it just helps ease it. And then for the mentor, when you go and you place them in there, it's a great way to go and see, can they lead other people, right? It becomes that foundation that you get to observe how well are they communicating back to you as a leader, how they're working with their mentee. And it goes and gives a broader perspective to the leadership in the studio, because they know that someone stepped up and above their normal role. And so they're like, oh, they've mentored 2 people, 3 people, and we're gonna need a lead on this next show. what's the feedback loop from the mentees? Is this someone that they'd feel comfortable to be their leader? So it becomes this really nice ecosystem of mentorship. And going back to what you were saying about in the community, I think that going and working with schools is another great way to go and build community mentorship and leadership. Because when you're only working on a project but you're not tapping out into the community, sometimes you can lose why you do what you do, because you're just kind of living in an echo chamber, and so it can be a really nice inspiration as well.
Can you expand on that last part, like how?
With the school part?
Yeah, exactly. Like how are the classes? Like what classes are there, or even if there are just programs available for people to experience, like animation, film, or whatever, just from the studio perspective to reach out, as well as maybe not even a school, like maybe it's online as well. Like,
Yeah. So I think it kind of depends on what your end goal is, right? If you want to become a really great artist and what you need to deepen your skills there, if you want to go more leadership and how you can go and build your influence and communication and leadership and just kind of decision making, right? It's kind of learning the business side. So again, there are those two pieces, but from a studio working with education, and again, for influence of building that this is an industry that you can go into, how I had done it in the past, and again, this is my previous life in university relations, working at 2 companies, is that naturally you have feeder schools that you hire from into your studio, right? So you can look at your recruitment data and see where are the spikes of who are really great programs and who are kind of trending that maybe I should pay attention to. And then I go to those schools and I ask those professors, what do you need from industry to do, to teach better? And oftentimes it's a feedback loop, where the trend is going, where is software going. Influencing projects, we did a lot of advisement on just developing curriculum and going and helping the professors create projects so that these became more portfolio relevant. And the other part of it was then asking the professors, oftentimes they want training too. So they were like, can I have a 1-day internship at the studio? I haven't been working in the industry for so long, what's going on? So we started to introduce that they could do it. We even did, we had one professor who took a term off and he actually stayed in the studio for 6 months. He was a professor of physics. And we were like, we don't know what you're gonna do, but we'll figure it out. He was blowing up, literally blowing up helium balloons outside for the effects department. They were loving it. But he just showed up in dailies and he was like, that rope wouldn't move like that in real life. Actually, the sway goes this way. So he started kind of contributing in this. And he wrote a book about physics for animation. So you can go and find him, Alejandro Garcia. But that's one way. And then again, with the professors that you have in college, they know which high schools or secondary programs are really great programs that are feeding into their school. So you just kind of start going down this little rabbit hole that then you go to the high schools or the secondary schools. And then those teachers know, well, where are the community art programs or things like this? And then you build there. And I think one of the things that's really great in Switzerland is that for secondary students, maybe about plus minus 14 years old, they're required to do 2 Schnuppertags, which is a sniff day. So they have to sniff out a career to see if they like it. And with larger organizations within Switzerland, they actually go and set up a 1-day curriculum and an application process. So then these students can go and apply to, so Google will do this. Google, by law, is required to have a Schnuppertag. They're required to do high school internships in Switzerland. So the students can go and apply to this. They get accepted into it just to kind of suss out the career. And then I've also done high school internships at a game studio where we did it across 4 weeks. And each week we just kind of developed a curriculum that this is what production management is. This is what tech is. This is what it means to be an artist, so that they could just sample through it and then we made them do a final project. But these are just some ways that you can kind of start to incorporate in big and small ways to start to get more people involved.
I don't know if studios are here, but I hope they're listening to you.
I recognize some faces in the audience. There's some studios here.
Just on that, actually, over here, the National Talent Academy. Hello, everybody. The National Talent Academy, one of our sponsors. Check them out, because that would be a great starting point as well. Yeah. Okay. You're welcome, Deirdre.
Didn't Eve just say the NTA? Yeah. Because I just wanted to add, that's all so brilliant and in progress in different ways across all the studios. But if you're in a studio or hoping to get into a studio, there's lots of different professional development courses with the National Talent Academy for Animation, but also with Cultural and Creative Industry SkillNet. So check them out through their social media, because they're all the time creating courses that are relevant to the requests that they're getting. So they're very timely and very relevant to what's going on in the courses or in the industry. But also, even if you are working in a studio, keep checking them out and bring it to your HR or your skills development team, because partnering with GURM or with CCIS or with NTA is invaluable, and it keeps everybody up to speed with what's going on, especially around innovative use of softwares and things like that, which is really important in these days.
And they're all funded as well, so you don't have to pay out of pocket yourself. The industry is paying for all of these courses with, we've partnered with all the different groups as well, and it's really, really important from a university perspective, because you don't want people coming out with degrees and they can't get work. So the industry is really taking care of people in Ireland at the moment, so it's just finding those, and you'll meet people who are on these workshops that are actually in your industry and are the people who are hiring. So it's really worth your while from a networking point of view to go in on these courses, and it doesn't cost you anything, it's just time. So it's up to yourself. I mean, you have to grasp your own career as well. You have to make your pathways. It can be a hard road. It's not an easy industry to work in, the media industry. And believe me, it took me a long time to keep knocking on those doors, but you have to do it. You can't expect the industry to hand you something for free. You have to do the work to get into the industry, because you can't say, oh, the studios aren't giving me jobs. The studios are giving jobs. It's up to you to make yourself employable, because responsibility works both ways. It doesn't work just on one side.
And just to just revert back to the mentorship piece as well, subtle plug, we will be looking for mentors for our communities from next year as well. So if anybody's interested in even becoming a mentor, sharing their story, opening up because we kind of focus on documentary filmmaking right now, but even opening up the animation world to our community, would be very open to hearing that as well.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'm going to say thank you. One more question there.
Sorry, it was just to compliment the panel. Thank you very much. Adrian Devan, production manager. One thing to add to what you've already said, something we do have done in drama in the last 6 years. I work in animation and drama, but live action, is we've had wellbeing facilitators in Disney and BBC and ZeniMax over the last 3-4 years. And they come in for a day and they just talk to the crew and the staff. I think there's a course starting in UCC shortly in wellbeing facilitating. And it's in the middle of the above the line, below the line, and it just goes in there just to get a little idea of what's going on and how they can help, and then they dip out again, and it's working really well. We did it on Doctor Who last year and The Witcher before that. And the last thing I just want to say is, talking about the getting in there young, I go out to the schools here, my wife's a teacher and she does animation and all of that in Galway, and getting in as early as possible, like he said already. And I think the best example is Creative Ireland made a video called The Spark, which you kept saying The Spark. They made it last week, it went live, it's got 10.5 million views. It's like amazing, and I think that's music and rap. If it's something in the animation side, just the same as that, it'll open up the young kids' minds. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just say just one quick word on the wellbeing coordination? That again was the industry came to us to create it, because there was workshops in the UK from private companies, and they wanted people to walk away with qualifications. So qualifications you can walk into any set with all over the world, and that's what we wanted to do, was to be able to give people NUI accredited qualifications so that people can walk in Australia onto a set and they'll go UCC because it's an international brand. So that was really important from an Irish perspective. We can have all the workshops in the world, but unless somebody has something they can put on their CV, as we know, it's your CV that's the first part of you that goes out there. But I don't want to take your job, but all of us are here all day. All of us are here all day. You just have to come up and talk to us, and because I think we all have a lot to say, as you heard. And there's a lot happening, so educate yourself about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.